hey, you work for AWS, I want a job. Can you refer me? And
No. It's not
yeah,
how it
it's
works.
it's the same. And and the thing is, they'll say, "Oh, but you said you're happy to refer." Yes, and but I don't know what jobs. Just because I work at a company doesn't mean I know all the jobs that exist. It's not my job to know what jobs exist in the company. Would you hire someone who's technically brilliant but difficult to work with?
Can I say depends?
No.
Ugh.
Pick one. Go ahead. What's one hard truth every job seeker needs to hear but doesn't want
You're probably not the most qualified candidate who applied.
to? Hi everyone, welcome to the Early Career Podcast. I'm your host Priyanka Mahankali. Let's talk about something for a second. You know those AI generated career hooks that are flooding your feed these days? Five things that nobody told you, or that one trick that got me hired at X company, or do this and you land another job, right? I feel like they're repetitive, oversimplified, and honestly a little bit insulting. Because careers are far more nuanced than that. It's not just one trick that's going to save you. There's a lot of different details that are involved. So instead of another recycled article, let's hear directly from people who are making decisions. What actually goes through a recruiter's mind when they see your resume? Why do some candidates get a call while others don't? What do recruiters wish every job seeker knew, right? And that's exactly why the Early Career Podcast exists. That's why we created this space for authenticity, to move beyond algorithms and clickbaits, to have authentic conversations with people who actually care about sharing the message, who challenge conventional thinking, stay true to themselves, and honestly, just have fun, right? So with that, welcome. Please join me in welcoming Tori Childers. Tori.
Hi, so nice to meet you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Hi, Tori. How are you doing? And thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I am currently just at work here, so excited to speak with you and share what knowledge I can about the recruiting space and candidates going through the application process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here and for wanting to share. I've observed you through LinkedIn for over the last year, and you've really earned my trust, and I've been really impressed by by your the authenticity of your content, and your drive and your intent. I think it really comes through because there's a lot of, I mean, if you look at LinkedIn these days, it's just so much clickbait content, and I'm just like, okay, what if I hear one more nobody ever told you this, I'm like, it's
Yeah,
getting annoying. I get it, it was a strategy, but now it's just getting annoying. So, and that's why I really
absolutely.
wanted you to bring you here, and for us to have a real conversation about what goes behind the scenes, in recruiting, in hiring, right? And
Yeah,
this kind of takes me back to 2016, to my the child in me, right? Or the young adult in me,
yeah,
where, right, I would be sitting in my dark room, in my bedroom, or my dorm room, basically. They're kind of like not so late up, and all that,
yeah.
and I was struggling to get a job, Tori. um, and actually, I don't think you know this about me, but I struggled to get a job for a year and a half after I graduated. And people know me as this whatever successful person, but
Yeah.
there was a struggle layer beneath that changed me. It changes you,
Yeah.
right? Struggle really changes you. And I would always wonder, what what does this recruiter want? What can I do to bring my resume to the top of that pile? Or what should I add in my resume to make it seen? And
Yeah.
sometimes recruiters would call me, and like we would just have that first call, and then I would never get a call back. So I'd be really sad about
Yeah.
what they wanted, and I felt like I did my best and all those things. So I think everyone has a lot of these questions, especially if you're in school, you're in your undergrad or masters, and you're getting your first job, right? Or you're in your early career, in your 20s, you've gotten your first job, but either you got laid off, or you're looking for that second next career pivot, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the scenario may be, a recruiter is always involved at that as that first step, and even eventual step, right? So
Yeah.
I've always been curious, what do recruiters actually do? What is their role in
Yeah.
general in the hiring process?
That's a great question. And I think it kind of changes, right, across different businesses, across different industries. I think a recruiter's role can really evolve. A lot of the things that my role has really been focused on is a lot more than just resumes. And I think like that's where a lot of people get stuck is they think that we're just kind of resume reviewers or paper pushers. And recruiters actually do a surprisingly vast amount of work. They're meeting with the hiring managers. They're understanding what the business problems are. They're calibrating interviewers, finding people across the business who have this skill or understand this skill and can actually, interview these candidates and truly provide valuable feedback on these candidate skills. We're helping them. We're helping candidates the coaching perspective, right? Telling them what to expect and how to prepare for these interviews. We're going through compensation. A lot of a recruiter's job is understanding compensation and what it takes to get someone in the door. We do a lot of forecasting, right? Trying to understand what demand looks like, where we need to be, and what the work backwards is to make sure that we find enough candidates and get them hired to kind of meet that growing business need. So it's not just reviewing a resume or rejecting a candidate. It is truly being that resource to the business and the hiring team of understanding their need, but then also being that resource and that partner to that candidate of explaining the process and helping them make sure that they're prepared for an interview or prepared to best showcase the work that they've done in alignment to what this team is looking for. So I kind of say they're like the mom, right? They're the person that everybody runs to with questions and who at the end of the day has to look at all of the things that they've done and put them back into an organized kind of roadmap or process to follow. And so that would be kind of how I describe recruiters or kind of what recruiters do on the day to day.
That's amazing. Wow, that was even eye-opening for me because you just assume that recruiters are doing this one thing, but I think I know what you mean because as I've been part of interviews on both sides of the table. I've seen the recruiters kind of help you go from start to finish, right, until you're actually fully onboarded into the job, right?
Yeah.
Um, but addressing the perception that people have of recruiting and addressing the segment of people who are looking for a job. I've heard of so many people who say, "Oh, I've reached out to so many recruiters, they never get back to me."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I say, "Oh, did you reach out to them on LinkedIn? Did you send them a good message? What was your message?" And all these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's not a binary thing like, "Oh, I reached out, they never responded back." I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And
Absolutely.
there's a reason, I think, as to why people don't get responses. So what do you think, what do recruiters need from candidates while they're reaching out to someone?
I think it's a combination of things, right? Kind of like you mentioned, it's a little nuanced. Every recruiter runs their desk differently, but how I approach it, and I get hundreds of messages every day on LinkedIn, and I get lots of emails as well, and then obviously the candidates that I'm actively helping. The things that make me be able to respond to you are is if you give me something actionable, right? Like I get tons of messages where it's like, hey, can you review my resume and suggest roles for me? Can you review my profile and tell me where I would find a fit? Things like that. Or can you take 30 minutes and talk me through it? Those, while I wish I had the time to address all of those and meet with everybody, I really don't, right? And so I tend to go through the ones where they provide me with the information of what they're looking for, what their background is, what position they've actually applied to. They give me something actionable, right? Just asking for 30 minutes of my time or asking me to proactively review your resume and provide you with jobs when I don't know what you like or what you've done or where you've accomplished outside of a profile that you shared with me doesn't really give me a true ROI, right? And for most recruiters, as terrible or as bad as it may sound, they are productivity based, right? They need to make hires, they need to support the business. And so when they're giving these extra, when they're doing the extra things to help candidates network, you've got to give them something actionable, right? Tell them where you want to be, tell them the roles you're interested in, tell them where they can make an introduction for you, but make it easy, right? If you're asking for a time up front without giving them any of the needed information, you're more likely to get a no. But if you go and you say, here's all this information, here's the roles I'm a fit for that I've applied to, here's why I think I'm a fit, it's a lot more likely to get that 20 or 30-minute conversation because you put in the time, right? You know that these are the right roles, you know that you're a fit for it. You're not asking them to just jump on a call and do the legwork for you. And so I think that typically gets a much better response rate than just generically asking for time or to review your resume. A lot of companies, recruiters are niche or they're specialized. They support a specific area of the business. And so you may or may not know that from LinkedIn or from other areas where you're kind of encountering them as the recruiter. And so reaching out with a really broad ask, like I get reached out to all the time about robotics. I don't have a knowledge there, right? Like
Yeah.
you may be the best robotics engineer there's ever been, and I still am not going to know that or be able to help you in that area. And so you want to find the recruiter that can help you, and you do that by giving them the information. And then when they say, oh yeah, like that's an area I support, like absolutely, let's meet, you're much more likely to get that positive feedback or response than people who reach out to me and like I have no knowledge or background in what they do. um, I don't have a lot to offer, right? My advice probably isn't going to make or break your hiring process here. And so you want to be targeted, intentional, do the legwork and give them something actionable, right? Don't just ask for time, don't leave an open-ended, can you tell me where I would fit? Go do the research, provide them with the information, and then give them something actionable.
Absolutely spot on, Tori. And this reminds me of the fact that I think cold calling basically doesn't, what you're saying is cold calling or cold messaging doesn't work in the way that people think that they do. And what you're basically saying is that instead of targeting 1,000 people, target 10 people, but have it high quality,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the more quality your outreach, the more likelihood that you're actually going to get a response. If you send 1,000 recruiters a message to just meet, you're not very likely to get a response to that. But if you sent 100 recruiters who recruit for what you do a message that says, hey, I applied to the job that you have open and here's why I'm a fit, would you be open to hopping on a call? I would bet that you're going to receive probably 20, 30, 40% more response than you would just having that kind of blank ask.
Absolutely. I mean, I've even seen people message me and I tell them, like, yeah, I can help you if I can, but even if we're all human beings, right? We also have personal lives and
Yeah.
work and all those things, right? So like when someone's reaching out, like I tell them that don't assume that we're some superhumans, right? We're just like you.
Yeah.
So make it as easy as possible. And so, as you said, right? And when someone reaches out to me saying, hey, you work for AWS, I want a job. Can you refer me? And
No. It's not
yeah,
how it
it's
works.
yeah, it's the same. And and the thing is, they'll say, "Oh, but you said you're happy to refer." Yes, and but I don't know what jobs. Just because I work at a company doesn't mean I know all the jobs that exist. It's not my job to know what jobs exist in the company,
Exactly.
right? So to your point, like they need to reach out with at least the job ID, maybe like again, why they think they're a good fit. And again, keep it short because I've also seen people who would send a really long message assuming that the other person's going to have the time to read it.
Yeah.
But, right?
Quick,
Yeah.
actionable.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Short. Keep it short, guys, because nothing kills your chances more than a long email to someone who already doesn't have time,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And I think the part on where it's like, hey, if you can tell me why you're a fit for this role, if I'm not the right recruiter, I can take that and say, hey, I already know the candidate meets bop, 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 bop that you're looking for. Can you take a look, right? And I think that's where it kind of makes that difference too, where some of the people who reach out and they're like, hey, I'm interested in this role. If they don't give me that information, maybe I can go through their LinkedIn profile and say, okay, I see this, I see that, I see this, but that's going to take me 10,
Yeah.
15 minutes, right? And then I have to go forward it to that recruiter. Where if they just provide that, I can literally snip it, that little, send it to the recruiter. And I'm like, hey, here's their profile, here's their resume, here's why they're a fit. And that just, that's a lot easier for me to do than for you to send me your information, say I applied, and then me try and go back and align why you're a good fit for this position or not, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what would when you're looking at resumes or LinkedIn profiles, what do you look for in candidates in their resumes, and how are they? What makes you instantly like trust someone enough to say, oh, I think this might be a good candidate, this might be a good fit? Because I know a lot of people say, oh, I've written this great resume and it's not getting picked up by the system or by recruiter or whatever that is. So, what is your viewpoint of what people should keep in mind while they're either creating resumes, or while they're managing their LinkedIn profiles?
So for me, it's that your information is actually digestible. I think a lot, and especially with like the growing of AI and the AI usage for generation of resumes, we are getting so many resumes that are just word salad, right? They have a lot of fancy words, they say a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, they don't really tell you anything. Um, that doesn't do me any good, right? I need to be able to read your resume very quickly. I'll be very honest with you, right?
10
We really
seconds, right?
are, yeah,
Not even
it's
like
it's
5 seconds.
it's a very quick look. And, I will say for most of the roles that I'm working on that are super technical, those are going to go like a minute or 2 minute per resume. But if I'm not immediately seeing the tools that you're using being called out, the results that you've driven, if your resume doesn't have like a tangible result that you've driven throughout it, that's a big red flag to me. If you're not able to explain to me what you're doing in your job today in that resume, that highlights to me that you maybe don't understand it well enough. And so I'm looking to digest what you've said, understand the tools that you do, the results that you, or the tools that you use, sorry, the results that you drive, and then the areas, right, where you have competency. Those are the big main things that I really need to understand. And then can I read your resume and understand what you do? Technical communication and being able to communicate written is huge where I hire. And so I think that even feeds back to the resume, right? Like if you put a bunch of words on a resume that don't mean anything to anybody, you're probably not going to be able to come in and write in the technical capacity that we need. And so that's what we look at too, right? With resumes, can I read this line for line and does it tell me something? And not just maybe what you do, but like how you do it, how you've delivered results. I think those are going to be kind of key to it as well. But I know obviously that's really hard, right? Like it's
Yeah.
hard to tell somebody how to make the right resume, but it really should speak to the tools that you do, the results that you drive, and the areas of the business that you support, especially like customer. I think that's a big space that people forget to include. Who was your customer? Who were you supporting, or what was your business why? And if I can gather that information from the resume, typically I can action it, right? If I can get down to the tools, the results, who, where, why, then normally I'm able to push you forward into, either a call with me or to the resume for, or to the hiring manager for review or something like that.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a very interesting point about it being outcome driven, right? And not
Mm-hmm.
just task based, like, oh, I did this task. No, why does that task matter? And
Yeah.
why is that on your resume? And why should someone like I have this policy of, oh, if you remove this thing from a resume, is it okay, or is
Detrimental.
it right?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's how you kind of keep your resume short, because also there's a conception or misconception that if I have too many words, like if I have too many bullet points for each project, and if I have my resume 3 pages long, that's when I'll get hired, right?
Hmm.
But
No.
it's not like that, right?
No, yeah. I mean, page count, word count, all of that has never been a metric I've ever used as a recruiter. I've been doing this 15 years now, and I truly like I can never say like, oh, this candidate had 5 page resume, this candidate had 1 page resume, like that mattered. It really doesn't. I think the piece is truly, can someone read it and understand what you do? Because so many people don't realize how either nuanced or kind of just to them, right? Like certain things mean things. And so you have to be able to take a step back. And my advice to a lot of people, it's with interviewing, same, take your resume, take your interview questions to somebody who doesn't do what you do, who doesn't understand what you do, and ask them, what did you get from this? Where did you go with this story? What do you understand? What did you hear me tell you that I do? And if those things make sense, if what they said is true to who you are, if what they were able to grasp really shows the breadth and depth of your experience, then you're doing a really great job. But if you go to somebody and they're like, I have no idea what any of that means, you probably want to take a step back, right? Because, and I'm not saying this against any recruiter or any HR person, but not all of us are technical experts, right? Not all of us have
Of
been
course.
reading resumes 15 years. There are people who have more limited knowledge, and you want to account for that, right? Like you
Right.
want to understand that every application you put reaches a different recruiter who has a different skill set and a different background. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to digest or intake the same information that somebody else would. And so I think that's where kind of approaching someone who maybe isn't so close to you or to your career and asking them, like, hey, can I share my resume? Hey, can I go over some of these interview questions and kind of explain my part of it and see what you take, because they're really looking at it from that lens of, I don't know you, right? Like I don't know what you're telling me, and coming at it from that. And that's almost the best perspective, because that's what a recruiter is too, right? Like they don't know you, they don't know your story. Hopefully they know the technology they're hiring for, but sometimes they don't, right? Recruiters
Yeah.
are meant to be fungible employees who can just go in and be more of like a pattern recognition business need expert, and then match talent on the back end. It doesn't mean that they understand embedded software, or that they understand robotics, or that they
Yeah.
understand whatever technical piece. And so making sure that your resume speaks to anyone who encounters it about what you do and who you are, I think is kind of paramount to knowing that you're getting your message across.
Absolutely. And I think I'll speak on behalf of everyone who is in the technical field. So, engineers, developers, solution architects like myself. I think we tend to kind of assume that if you're technical, that means your resume also has to be,
Hmm.
yes, your resume has to be technical, but it also has to convey business outcomes,
Yeah, and
right?
digestible, right? Like as someone who's non-technical still needs to be able to read it and digest it, because that is most of the time HR talent, right? Like they're not a technical person. So absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of resume story, do you think that that is still the primary vehicle for hiring, for the hiring process, or do you think it's shifted to more LinkedIn? What should candidates like focus on more if they're
Yeah.
trying to get a job?
It's a good question. I will always think resumes are paramount. I think this is probably a debatable topic in recruiting, right? Some people will say networking is the end all be all. I'm a big believer, every job I've ever had, I had to apply to, right? At some point in the process, whether a recruiter reached out to me in the beginning or whether there was no recruiter involved until the very end, I've always had to apply to that job. You can't apply without a resume. You just can't. And so I tell people you should have a resume. You should have a good resume. Like if you can invest in a resume, I think that is a great place too. If you can't, I understand, but then go back and do the research and spend the time really honing that resume because it's almost like your portfolio, right? It is an example of the things you've accomplished. I've even used my resume internally, right? When it comes to promotion
Oh,
times and things like that. Your resume is a collection of your accomplishments, the things that you've done throughout your career. And so yeah, I will always say I think resumes are paramount to hiring, and your best bet in landing a job at a company is applying through the company website.
right. Okay. So resumes you think still are relevant. They're still sort of at least a primary form of recruiting and hiring, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say every company I've ever worked for either worked on an ATS system or some sort of database system where that's how we actioned hiring. And in that, you have to create the employee file via their resume when they apply. Yeah, I absolutely think resumes are still
Right.
needed. Now, would I say maybe more so than a LinkedIn? I don't know, like they're probably pretty equal. Because a lot of the times you are being reached out to on LinkedIn for more of those passive opportunities, which can be really lucrative and uncover a lot of things. So, probably equally important, but resumes I don't think will ever go away unless the way we onboard employees changes.
There's people still, even with this level of clarity that we're sharing right now, they might say, "Oh, but it's really I've been looking, I've been doing this exact same thing, or I've been doing all these things, and I still haven't found a job, and it's been 6 months or it's been a year." Any words of warmth or hope as a recruiter that you might want to share to them to kind of keep holding on?
Yeah, and it is right. It's a really hard job market. I think we were seeing some of the toughest kind of times in recruiting and hiring that I've been a part of. Even like 2008, I know a lot of recruiters remember that downturn. Um, but you have to remember that it is almost like an odds or a numbers game. The quicker you are to applying, being in that first few rounds of applicants is always helpful. Doing the networking. But if you're putting the work out there, it will come back, right? Like that is how it works. It's definitely a space where the work you put in isn't necessarily realized right away, but it will on the back end, right? Like all of the networking that you're doing, even if it doesn't land you a position today, it could land you a position 6 years from now. And so, um, I think it's definitely bleak, and there's a lot of misinformation and people kind of like doom marketing and putting out posts that make you feel like every job is rejecting candidates on from AI and all of these things, right? But at the end of the day, people are still getting hired. People are still finding jobs. And so keeping that positivity, keeping that hope, not letting it affect how you show up to the job search, I think is really important, right? The way you feel about yourself, the way you feel about your job search will come through when you're interviewing. And so being able to keep that kind of positive mindset and outlook almost too is going to come through. And so I definitely understand, like, hey, these are our lives. Like, I've got kids to feed, we've all got bills to pay, and it can be really emotional when you need a job. But I do think like kind of keeping hope and keeping positivity and doing the things that are within your power to continue to educate yourself and make your resume better and network with recruiters or things like those are all going to help you. But if you kind of lean into that doom marketing, if you kind of start believing what people are putting out there that's in that negative light, it's probably going to keep happening, right? Like we definitely see the results of the things we put our our mind and our investment in. And so if you invest in that kind of like negative mentality and kind of thought process, I do think like those are the results that you'll find too. And so I know that's probably not like this, oh, everyone's going to get a job tomorrow that like some people would want, but I do. I think it affects the way you show up. And that is kind of paramount, right, to being hired. Being able to show them that you are the person who can do this role, and that you're going to bring um, a positive footprint to the team, I think is also paramount to the skills, and that's what comes through, right, when you're talking to hiring managers or interviewers. If you're just worried about getting the job or you think you're going to be rejected, you're going to be pitching yourself from that perspective versus a more positive perspective.
Tori, I think now I know why we're on this podcast together, because you hit on something that I think I posted on LinkedIn myself like probably like 2-3 months back. But you hit on something that is what I believe in my soul, and where I tell people sometimes that, hey, you need to stay positive and you need to like work on your mental health. And I like literally at the end of every podcast episode that I've done, I say none of this matters if you don't take care of your health. So please, guys, take care of your health first, because
Yeah,
that is where everything comes from, right?
100%.
And so you hit on a very important point, which is how you feel is how you're going to show up in an interview, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're desperate, if you have desperate energy, or if you, as you said, just feel like the whole world is against you, or you're in some sort of a blame game, which, all of those feelings are valid. But
Mm-hmm.
again, like channeling them into working into finding a positive space for yourself so that you can show up as your best self. Because as you rightly mentioned, companies are also looking at the culture fit, not
Mm-hmm.
just the skills fit, right?
Yeah.
Especially companies like Amazon, who really are picky about the culture fit. Someone who's passionate, someone who's positive, someone who's bringing new energy to the team, to the role,
Yeah.
who has a high bar. So, and I'm sure there are a lot of companies, especially tech companies, especially where innovation is so high,
Mm-hmm.
they do care about culture as a
Yeah.
very important element. And so, uh, and even now, like 2 days back, I went to like a spa. They have this hot and cold plunge kind of thing,
Yeah.
um, right? And I love doing those, but that's also like I try to do that as often as possible, because it's a reminder for me to, like, in the end, come back to myself, right?
Yeah.
Because all of our achievements and sorrows, in the end, we have to put that into perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then that's when you actually are able to bring your best self to any environment, when you are truly able to connect with yourself. And I know this sounds philosophical, um, but
It's
it
true.
couldn't be further from the truth. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so
And
guys,
that
if
was,
yeah,
oops,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, it made me kind of think, like, when we go out into the world, a lot of times, especially if we have a negative opinion or a negative kind of thought process, we almost look for confirmation bias, right? Like, we look for things to confirm our belief. And so I think that happens in a job search too. If you're like, hey, recruiters don't help me, I always get rejected, I'm never gonna find a job, I would almost wonder, like, are you also going to be seeking positions and opportunities that are going to confirm that belief versus, kind of showing you, hey, that's not the case, right? And so I would also say, like, how you approach things and like your mindset, it will, right? It will drive your outcomes, because as humans, we look to confirm our current beliefs. And if our belief is, I'm never going to get hired, you're going to just keep looking for the things that tell you that. And so I think that has a big part of it too.
Absolutely, I couldn't have said it better than you did. So thank you for saying that. And this does remind me of something, though, which is job description story.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard of this is a little bit of a gender thing as well, where, for one, there's people in their early career who struggle to obviously find an entry level job which
Yeah.
has almost 0 to 2 years experience. And then there's jobs that are like 5 to 7, and then there's jobs that are like 10 plus, 15 plus, 25 plus, and so on, right?
Sure.
I I tend to tell people that, and I tend to tell myself too, in that process, is that is not a fixed, hard, set in stone, hard number. It's just a general sort of uh, estimation
Hmm.
of maturity or seniority that a role is expecting. But that doesn't mean that, okay, if it says 5 to 7 years, then if you have four, that it means you can't apply at all, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then I also see this more with women when I mentor them, where women tend to be overly self-critical,
Yeah.
where they will look at something and be like, oh, I can't do it. Or they look at a company like, I've been at AWS for 9 years, and I've told, a lot of my friends and uh, people I mentor that, hey, if you need a referral, I'm happy to. And even with that, they're like, oh, Amazon, I'll never get a job there. Oh, that's too hard. Or, it could be
Yeah.
any big tech company, right? Really. And because they look at the job descriptions, or they just assume that the bar must be so high and they won't get it. And this is women usually saying this. And then on the other hand, most men will typically apply even if they're not fully qualified. Of course, there are edge cases in both scenarios.
Hmm.
But can you speak a little bit about, just first of all, in general, what are biases that we shouldn't have, or what are narratives we
Yeah.
shouldn't have uh, when we're looking at job descriptions, and also talking a little bit about the gender, and if that's true, and how does that affect the pipeline for you guys?
Yeah. So I do. I think imposter syndrome, which is something I feel like I definitely suffer from, and a lot of women that I know definitely suffer from, and is what prevents them from applying to jobs where they likely have the skills. My advice to most people is take the job description as a manager's wish list, right? Most hiring managers or interviewers, when they go and they put a job description together, they're putting together what their ideal candidate looks like, right? In there, there will be some basic qualifications that candidates have to have. A lot of times, this is like to help with compliance or policy or things like that, just keep things equitable. But those are normally far lower than what's actually stated in the job, right? Unless it says like basic qualifications, there's just a few things there, then you'll know, right? Those are the basic quals. But outside of that, that's really a wish list. I tell most candidates if you have more than 60 to 70% of what is mentioned in that job posting, you should apply. Obviously you can shoot your shot and you can apply to anything out there, but if you're covering more than half of what's listed there, you're likely pretty qualified. Now, are there roles that are really oversaturated with talent and people? Absolutely, for sure. And on those, are those hiring managers and those teams going to be a little more stringent about crossing off the things on their wish list? Absolutely. But for majority of jobs, right, outside of like software development or some of those that I would say have really seen like huge gains in candidate and talent availability, um, those hiring managers most of the time would be happy crossing off half the things on those lists as like, yes, you have, yes, you have, yes, you have. And the other half are likely learnable on the job. Now, when you kind of bring it back to gender, yes, we obviously do see a huge discrepancy and men typically applying for roles that they're underqualified for, and women only applying for roles that they're more than qualified for. Typically, women look to have everything listed on the job posting before they apply. And again, reality, if you're checking off half of those boxes or more, you're likely a pretty qualified candidate. And you probably have additional skills that the manager haven't listed there that would also complement the team. And so I think it's one of those things where if you're not sure, you should apply. If you get a rejection, then you'll know. But taking that opportunity, putting your name in the hat, I don't think those are ever negatives. especially in women, we need more women in these spaces. A lot of times, if the team doesn't have that diversity, they are specifically saying, like, how can we find this diversity? And so they are more open to flexing on specific skills or things like that if it brought in something that they're currently missing on their team. And so, I would always just encourage people apply or have a conversation with the recruiter if they reached out to you specifically. Like, I've gotten so many people who are like, hey, I'm not sure I'm qualified, but then I talk to them and they've got, something else really niche that we're looking for or things like that. So, um, don't not apply because you take yourself out of the running. Like, let the company evaluate, let the recruiter evaluate, because they may see something you don't. They may know something you don't. They may know that the hiring manager asked for a unicorn and you were almost that unicorn, you just don't know it. And so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, don't read the job description and don't assume that you know everything.
Absolutely. And I think that I wish I heard you say this like, you know, 10 years back, because I would
Yeah,
have been like, that makes so much sense now. Because, I think when you don't know these kinds of things and you assume things, and then you kind of get in your own way,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it's that imposter syndrome that we all have. Everything, no, we're never gonna be qualified for this, or, and then, I just think just apply. You don't lose anything, right?
No,
Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to
I
get
know.
rejected. That's okay too, right? And then that's part of the process of getting to the place that deserves you and that you
100%.
deserve.
And you're
Yeah.
learning, right? And like another thing too, you may apply to that job and you may get a no today, but your information is now in that company's database. And the next time a recruiter opens that type of role, they're going to go and search and you're going to pop up. And so, um, I think applying isn't always a instant gratification, which a lot of people want. Um, but it is a strategy move, right? You are going out, you're putting your name into hats at these companies that you want to work for. And then you're kind of just biding your time until the right opportunity comes open if it wasn't that one. And so I don't think that's ever a bad thing. Again, big proponent of go out to the job boards or the companies that you want to work for and apply directly to their roles, even if it's not a perfect match, because you're going to get into their database. The recruiters are going to start becoming familiar with your name. And you're just going to widen the opportunity that you have of actually landing there.
Oh wow, that is actually reminding me uh, of how I actually got into AWS story. So let me just share a little bit of that with everyone and you as well. Um, I actually never knew. I went back in. This is back in 2017, guys. So don't judge me. But I didn't know what AWS was. Cloud was still a new thing at that time, and
Yeah.
so I had applied to Amazon retail, right? Amazon.com, and that's the only thing that everyone knew, Amazon.com. So I applied to Amazon.com. I think in 2016, and then
Mm-hmm.
I had even like interviewed for a couple of rounds, and then got rejected, and then I was applying to like other big tech companies and all that. And then in 2017, a recruiter from AWS, not Amazon.com,
Yeah.
AWS, reached out to me saying, "Hey, we found your resume in the database, in our database, and seems like you have strong networking, like computer networking skills,
Mm-hmm.
which we need for this role that we're creating, which is a solutions architect. It's a new role, etc., etc. Would you want
Yeah.
to, will you be willing to interview for this position?" So initially I was like, wait, that I didn't apply to this, so that definitely seems like some sort of a scam or something. Because it was
Yeah.
it was hard to believe that
Yeah.
Amazon or AWS is, such a big company is reaching out to me themselves without me applying for it, right?
Yeah.
so in,
Absolutely.
so so yeah, so your story is exactly, or what you're sharing is my reality that happened to me, where and then I got into AWS and I've been there for 9 years, but I never actually applied to AWS. I always tell people that I used to apply to like thousands of jobs And the
Yeah.
one job that I didn't apply to, I got into that one.
Yeah, well, and I think that happens a lot here, right? So, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story too. I applied to Amazon 7 times before I came to work here.
Wow.
I applied to like HR fulfillment center roles, talent acquisition recruiters, staffing workforce. And then I was actually happily employed, and a recruiter reached out to me from AWS as well and was like, "Hey, I've seen you have applied to a few things in the past, but it's been a while. Like, are you still interested?" And that's how I ended up here today. And so, I think again, like that's a huge way to just become known to that company or that recruiting team, or even that hiring team. Even if it's not today, right? A no today doesn't mean a no tomorrow. And I think a lot of recruiting and hiring isn't just about what you're doing today, right? It's always the future and where you can kind of go from there. And um, networking, getting in with recruiters, talking to them about openings, like those are never negatives. That your name is going to stay with that person. That person may or may not reach out again. And if they do, like it may be the right opportunity. And, sometimes that takes a little faith, I think, from a candidate side. Just believing that the recruiter will come back to them or that the recruiter will go search the database. And um, there's recruiters who have made people not want to believe those things, but I think when you do, it can be really powerful, right? When you um, take away the doom marketing, kind of the negatives, the recruiters ghost everyone. You really can see that a lot of recruiters are truly just trying to hire people, right? Like a recruiter doesn't win when they reject a candidate. A recruiter wins when they make a hire. And so even every no that we have, we are thinking, well, is there something else for this person? And so you want to be that person that recruiter is thinking about.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on, and also in the best interest of the recruiter to hire
Mhm.
someone, right? Because that's what
Yeah,
you guys are being measured on is how fast you're optimizing your time to get a hire, right? And because
absolutely.
I know that's the same thing with hiring managers as well. They're trying to get people hired
Yeah,
fast. They're not being, as you said, they're not being rewarded for rejecting people or taking their own time to do so.
no, yeah. And that's exactly it, right? Like every interview that a hiring manager does or an interviewer does is time away from their team, is time away from the goal that they're pushing towards. And so you want to use those things wisely, and a recruiter's job is to understand that need and put that right candidate in front of them. And a lot of the times when candidates get rejected, we're bummed too, right? Like we're trying to understand, okay, well, where did we miss the mark? How could we have done better? And so I think it's kind of an interesting situation where like recruiters need candidates and candidates need recruiters, but there's been this campaign of like recruiter hate, or all recruiters are bad for so long because of recruiters and staffing agencies and recruiters who don't do their job and recruiters who do ghost candidates. And so um, I feel like that has been way more of like what people hear versus the positives, because the negatives, again, they feed that algorithm, they feed that doom marketing. And so um, when candidates take that step back and they understand like recruiters are here to help me, I do think it empowers them, because it's something that we encounter too on like the end process when we're helping them. When I first reach out to candidates, I feel like they're really conversational to me and they want to answer all my questions. But then when I'm kind of helping them through the process, it's almost like they're thinking I'm still evaluating them. And so they don't get that comfort level. And it's like, no, like I'm here to help you too. And
Right.
so I think there needs to be kind of that change or that pivot in the conversation of seeing recruiters in such a negative light and not where candidates are starting to build trust with recruiters. Because when you build trust with your recruiter and you're like, hey, they're helping me prepare, and I am being authentic, or I'm being vulnerable enough that I'm asking the right questions, I'm going through example interview things, that's where you're going to see that positive come in, right? Like if you always treat the recruiter kind of like, hey, stop at the door, you're just a gatekeeper, you're not here for me, you're just here from the business perspective, you could be losing the only positive that that recruiter can bring to your journey, right? Like, and not all recruiters, not every recruiter offers prep, but just the other day, like I met with a candidate for a prep call, and he was really just prepared to answer my questions, and I'm like, hey, no,
Wow.
this is for you. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions, for you to feel comfortable, for you to feel confident. And so my hope is that if we change the conversation around the candidate recruiter relationship and kind of what that looks like and go back to building that trust, I do think candidates would see such a better experience because they would have that relationship to fall back on. They would have that trust to fall back on. And maybe they would even take some of the coaching or the prep a little bit more to heart because they know, like, hey, this really is coming from somebody who wants me to do my best. And
Yes.
I don't know that everyone comes into the conversations with that thought process just because they have seen all of the negative.
Yeah.
Um, so that would probably be like the big caveat I would say too is the candidate recruiter relationship being in that positive light and candidates kind of turning that corner of starting to trust and um, work with recruiters more closely, I think will also improve the outcome and the output that they're
Experience.
getting.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this reminds me of something that my recruiter had mentioned to me before I got hired into AWS was the leadership principles, right? And that's something that started with Amazon many moons ago. Jeff Bezos, was the one that created those leadership principles, right? And I
Yeah.
love them. And it got so famous that now it's almost become like a subtle sort of industry standard. Like every company
Mhm.
wants to embody those. Sometimes leadership principles are actually used as a competitive advantage, even for interviewing for companies, because they're like, oh, if you know these things, then that's great. So they're used, and also they're very actively used within Amazon, within AWS, that I know. And for example, when we're wanting to disagree with someone, we use the leadership principle. Hey, I think let's disagree and commit on this. And I think it makes it easier to do
Mhm.
that. And so it's kind of become this sort of fabric for conversation, for decision making, for business outcomes, and just for creating or fostering a overall net sort of positive culture, right? And so a lot of candidates, I think, get intimidated by the leadership principles before they get hired because they assume that, okay, I have to memorize all these leadership principles. There's like 14, 16 of them. And
Mhm.
then now I have to also have a separate example for each of these. So I have to have like,
Yeah.
16 different examples, right? and
Yes.
and I'm like, that's not the case, but I'd really love to hear from you what's your view of leadership principles, and how are they actually put into context in the hiring process, and how should candidates really prepare for any interview, really, using leadership principles as a guiding light.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question, and I think it's something where no one's answer will be the same, right? The big thing with leadership principles and the behavioral style questions, I think, that evaluate them is they're not really necessarily looking for the perfect story. And I think that's where a lot of people come from. They come from, can I memorize these leadership principles? Can I memorize these behavioral style questions? And then can I memorize my star stories that speak to them? But the problem is we're not just evaluating the story that you're sharing, we're trying to evaluate your thought process. How did you get there? Who was involved? Who were you influencing? What was the business reason behind it? Are you able to kind of work through things with, deep technical communication, things like that, right? They're truly trying to understand how you approach a problem versus just the story that you're sharing. And so I think a lot of people get really stuck on, again, kind of trying to deliver, oh, I'm 100% customer obsessed, or, oh, I absolutely exhibit learn and be curious all the time. And they'll just kind of start pitching themselves toward that leadership principle. and they forget that the whole idea of the question is to understand how you approach that subject or that topic or that problem. And so if you just give them, well, you know, this was the situation, this is what I did, and there's no data, there's no business why, there's no, this is who I influenced, and these were the risks that I took. You're not showing them that you could keep doing that job, right? Like you're showing them in this very one scenario, this is what the outcome was. But what they're really needing to understand is in all scenarios, right? In all situations, how are you going to go about that problem or that situation? Are you going to bring people along with you? Are you going to act as a cowboy and kind of do things on your own? Are you going to look around corners and anticipate things as they're coming? And so I think we need to take a step back from the leadership principle and focusing so much on what leadership principle are they asking a question on, and let me make sure that I show them that I exemplify that leadership principle. But think of it more like, hey, all of these stories come from like a main category, whether it's a failure or a difficult customer or a lesson learned or something like that, and understand, hey, am I providing a story that shows my thought process, how I work through problems, and how these are going to be repeatable in this role. Because likelihood is you don't have a story where you've done the exact thing you're going to do in this job today, right? Like you're probably not going to share with them the exact situation that you're in, but you are going to share with them a story that is a similar situation, and then they're going to be able to work backwards and understand, okay, if they were in Amazon, this is how they're going to approach things and this is how they're going to do things. And that aligns with what we do or that doesn't. That either leaves a lot of risk or it doesn't. The second thing that I would kind of also go back to is the 16 leadership principles. Not all leadership principles are must haves for every role, right? Like frugality. I've never seen frugality covered on a loop. Strive to be Earth's best employer. Again, never seen covered on a loop. So there's some of these LPs where, yes, they are paramount to who we are as Amazon. They are part of the fabric of Amazonians, but they're not necessarily uncoachable, or they're not necessarily stopgaps. Like, hey, if you don't have this exact leadership principle to this level today, you won't work in this role. Normally, there's just a couple of those, right, which the hiring manager will pick, and there's a few that are absolute must-haves for all roles. Earn trust, customer
Customer
obsession. Those are
obsession.
pretty
Yep.
much, yeah, they have to be there. But some of those others, think big, learn and be curious, dive deep. Those are things where a lot of times managers have that coachability, right? They have that, hey, we're going to bring them in. They have everything but these three things. Here's some coachable areas for them while they're onboarding. And so I think, you want to consider that you may not have every leadership principle to the level today that they're looking for, but do you have the core ones? And if you do, that will enable you to pick up those other ones. And I think that's how they kind of created the leadership principles too, is if you naturally have some of these things, it leads you to start building some of those others, like dive deep and learn and be curious, right? If you're strong in learn and be curious, you're likely going to be able to take a bigger risk when hiring that candidate, because they've already shown they can go out and learn these things naturally through their own avenues, versus having to be, kind of explicitly taught those things. And so, I know I feel like that was like a lot of
Oh,
all over the place, but the leadership principles are important. Not every leadership principle has to be had in every role, but you're not speaking to the leadership principle, you're speaking to your thought process and how you approach problems, and you're trying to show them a repeatable mechanism or repeatable actions that you are comfortable taking in these scenarios, that will produce outcomes that are positive to what the managers are looking for.
absolutely. I think this, um, what you said called as long-winded, is actually very necessary, because these are the nuances, these are those details that you that are hard to communicate, and people may not have heard these things before, right? So, um, and I think what you're alluding to is the behavioral and vulnerability component, right? Which I think a lot of candidates miss out on
Hmm.
because they think, oh, if I say I don't know the answer to this, or I'm vulnerable in an interview,
Yeah.
that's a weakness. But actually, um, I think that it's a strength because what you're saying is that I want to know the candidate, and the things we want to know about people are not necessarily successes. They're
Yeah.
mostly failures,
Yeah.
right? It's like, okay, how did you fail? Because the reality is in the business world, you
You're
are going
going
to
to.
fail. There's no possibility of success without failure, right? In
Absolutely.
fact, it's a series of repeated failures and you bouncing back, right?
Yeah. That's
So
the point, right? Like
yeah,
that shows like, hey, I've got the tenacity. I'm going to be able to keep doing this. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So um, I think that's something people struggle with, is finding that right balance of, okay, I don't like, how vulnerable should I be, right?
Hmm.
Should I say something like, oh, I'm really bad at time management? Because like, don't say that, guys.
No.
But
Yeah.
right, but something I think, and Tori, I would love for you to add on this, but what I believe is something that you're trying to share that is real, about you, that for example, saying, for me, my flaw is that, or my thing that I'm currently working on is that I'm a perfectionist, and it works in some scenarios
Yeah.
and it doesn't work in others. Like for example, for this podcast, the kind of prep work I was doing and all of those things, it's like I need things to be perfect. And even when I started this podcast a few months back, right, I was like, oh, until I have all these setups, I'm not going to do it. And then I realized, no, if I do that, it's going to be one more year before I actually do it. So fine, I'm going to go with whatever I have today,
Yeah.
and we're still going to focus on the most quality content. We're going to focus on the content, not the necessarily the aesthetics of it all, right? And those will build over time, and so that's what I'm actually working on right now for
Yeah.
myself. And so when I actually speak with interviewers, I do share this, but I also share that this is how I'm working on it. And
Hmm.
for example, one of the ways that I'm working on it is in the business world, is by creating short term milestones that are scrappy, but they deliver results. Because one of the flaws of a perfectionist is they find it hard to deliver results because they're
Yeah.
always uh, thinking about making the perfect solution, which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What is I'm sure you have a lot more color to add
Yeah.
than this.
So I think for me it's self-awareness, right? Like at Amazon, a big piece of, if we're going to hire someone outside of, the leadership principles, can they do the job, is do they have a level of self-awareness? And I think that's what kind of comes through in those questions where it's like, I did make a mistake, I did have a failure, I did miss a deadline, whatever. It shows that you have a level of self-awareness to go back and understand where you went wrong and learn from it. And so I think people who approach stories like they know everything and they haven't made mistakes, it almost comes off as more of like a case of non-self-awareness, because I don't know anyone who's not made a mistake in their career, right? Like I've made mistakes. I've sent the wrong emails to candidates. There's all kinds of things that I've done. And so um it can even show like, hey, maybe you haven't had enough scope, right? If you haven't made mistakes. And so you want to be able to go into an interview and show that you've made mistakes, but that you've learned from them. And so I think like that's where people need to focus their energy on more, rather than in like, hey, oh, I have to admit I made a mistake. Sure, no one loves that. No one wants to talk about the things that they didn't do right, or they missed, or they had to learn from. But where you're going to turn that story into a positive is the things that you've learned from it, how you're preventing it from happening again, where you grew, what it changed about you. Because again, Amazon isn't trying to understand the story you were talking about. They're trying to understand how you approached it and how you worked through it and the things that happened because of that. And so being able to show them like, hey, maybe I missed this deadline and it cost us $30,000, but I was self aware enough to go back and look and understand where this point of failure was, and then create a mechanism that kept it from ever happening again. That is way more powerful than just saying, no, I've always done everything right my whole entire career ever. I've never made a mistake, right? Because then they're going to wonder, well, when you do, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to shut down? Are you going to freak out? Like, how do you recover? And so I think that that's something that candidates need to understand. They don't want you to have the perfect answer for everything. They just want to know that you are self-aware enough that when you do make a mistake or when something doesn't go right, you're going to learn from it, and you're not going to just keep repeating and repeating and repeating those same problems. And so um, that's kind of my thing is own it, right? Own your mistake, but then explain how you prevent it from happening again, what you've learned from it, and kind of pitch it in that light.
Yep, yep, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important to find that that sense of, or remind yourself that you're a human being, and this comes back to our self-care and taking
Yeah.
care of ourselves and all of that, right? And you see how it ties back into all of these areas, right? Where if you don't feel secure, if you don't have a sense of security about who you are, what you've done, a sense of pride of, okay, I failed, but this is what I learned, and sense of groundedness about those things, then
Yeah.
you are going to be overly um, you're gonna come across as someone who doesn't have self-awareness, maybe someone who's maybe self-absorbed, or someone who's not even a team player,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think those are things that companies don't
Or risk
really.
adverse,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Like people who
yes.
haven't made mistakes typically aren't taking risks, and um, that's where innovation comes from, right? Is those risky opportunities or those things where we do take a little bit of risk, and knowing too, like that you can evaluate risk. I think that's a big piece of some of these stories is, hey, is this a risk where it's like a one-way door or a two-way door? Like, if I go and I do this, can I come back from it? If so, like, do you feel confident making those decisions? Do you feel confident, trusting your judgment? And so I think it, kind of leads into some of that as well. And understanding that even if you have made a mistake, that you can go back and then re-tackle those things. And um, I kind
Yeah.
of lost my train of thought. I
Oh
don't know.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. And I think actually one of my favorite interview questions um, that I ask candidates is to know, to your point, you said you have to be self-aware, right? And like a quick litmus test for me to know if someone's self-aware is, instead of asking them, what are your areas of improvements? Because everyone is very self-critical. Sure, we have a whole laundry list of
Yeah.
of that, right? But then
Yeah.
I ask people, tell me one thing you like about yourself. And Tori, you won't believe people. I've seen people struggle, like literally struggle to
Yeah.
answer that question.
Yeah.
And it shows that they've never asked that question of themselves before,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Interviewing is extremely, it's kind of like you have to be so comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that that's the part that gets people, right? Like that's the whole thing is you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and kind of working from there, because otherwise interviewing is really going to make you just like nervous, and like you're gonna get too much in your own head because
yeah.
it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you're going to want to hide, right? So, and this feeling of wanting to hide is going to put you in actually a disadvantaged position where you're not going to
Hmm.
actually share the challenges, the risks, or the failures, and all those things, right?
Yeah.
Um, and actually, to my surprise, someone interviewed me recently and asked me the same question, saying, "Oh, so Priyanka, what is it that you like in yourself, and also what is it you like in other people?"
Hmm.
And I was like, huh, that's interesting question. I've never been asked that. I usually ask that to other people. But my answers were not like, and this is something I've seen with candidates where they'll stay very businessy because they're
Yeah.
assuming that I'm expecting a business answer, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
just asking really like what do you like about yourself like as an individual, right?
Yeah.
And so I literally my answer was as simple as, I like what I like about myself is the ability to be empathetic in every scenario, and what I like about other people is their smile. That's it.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Very, yeah, very simple. And then even that person, was like, huh? Because I almost surprised them because they weren't expecting such a simple yet uh, real answer. Because I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure like it took me some guts to say that and mean it. And I even explained why I actually care about someone's smile. Because it shows the clarity of your heart, and it shows how easily you can work with them, and it actually shows how approachable they are and who they want to be. And then that, when someone smiles, you instantly want to start working with them, right? You're like, oh yeah, okay, right? So it adds so many different aspects of value. And he was like, oh, that's interesting, seems like you've done a PhD on smile. And I was like, no, it's when you're connected to yourself, right?
Yeah.
You that's so.
Authenticity.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, to everyone listening, please don't be afraid to come up with the most simplest. We have the leadership principle, invent and simplify, right? I think that's one of the hardest things to do because we always are thinking of the most sophisticated of responses, and we're thinking, oh, how do we, you know, you know, bring our this create this polished version of ourselves. But really what you're saying, Tori, as well, is that just be authentic and be real, be human, right?
Yeah. Well, and simplify too, right? Like I think that's a big one when it comes to like the resumes like you were asking about. It isn't about packing it full of words that don't really, again, I would go back to word salad, and I don't know if that even means anything to anyone, but you're not just trying to say a big word to say a big word, right? You really want your resume to be pretty simple, pretty straightforward, simple, easy to read. And, so that's what I would push back to is simplify your resume, make it readable, make it understandable, take it down to the results and the tools. And I think a lot of people will see an improvement. It's when we start making things sound overly complicated so they sound impressive, or whatever other term we want to kind of pack in there. That's where it really gets off the kind of axis of being helpful, right? Like AI is awesome. I love generative AI. I think it does some really incredible things. But we do have to take that step back and understand that we're not optimizing resumes for computers, we're optimizing resumes for humans.
Yeah.
And humans read in a normal syntax, in a normal kind of pattern and flow, and that's what you need your resume to do. You need your resume to be a very straightforward document that says exactly who you are, what you do, what you bring to the table, and what tools you have proficiency in. um, but overcomplicating it, kind of putting in those huge words and things where it's like, well, that was a huge sentence, but it really told me nothing. I think that is where AI is kind of making the job space and looking for a job a little bit harder, because again, these resumes that it's sending out sound great, but when you actually read them, they don't tell you anything.
That's actually was what I was going to ask you next is, has AI has definitely created a confusing market,
Yes.
so therefore confusing employees and candidates. And now everyone, even if things have remained the same, I know it has probably changed a little bit as you're saying, but you also said that a lot of the things are still the same, right? And
Mhm.
but because there's a lot of this, this looming confusion, and all of the LinkedIn posts and the marketing of it all, and nobody told you this, but let me tell you this, and
Yeah.
all these kind of things, right, have created
Yeah.
this confusing. I mean, in fact, even yesterday I was talking to my friend, and she was like, oh my god, if I see one more LinkedIn post where it says nobody told you this, or things like
Yeah.
that. that
Yeah.
start with that, you're like, it's just, so I think all of those things have created this very confusing mindset.
Yep.
Um, and so, has AI really changed things, Tori? And I know you've answered this a little bit in a earlier, but should people be confused, or should people just sort of continue to stay focused on, here's my resume, I need to make this meaningful, I need to apply, I need to reach out to recruiters, I need to send them the right email or message, I need to make the right applications, and then just sort of stay in my lane? Is there more that people should be doing apart from this in terms of networking and other things as well?
Yeah, so I think you asked a couple kind of questions in there, but I do think AI has changed recruiting and hiring, but just in a way that it has kind of lowered the barrier, the kind of entry point from like a resume perspective or application materials, right? It's made creating a resume a lot easier. Most people didn't have access to resume writers because they can be extremely costly, and now you're able to produce a result fairly similarly with an AI tool. But what it hasn't done is it hasn't lowered the bar in like actually demonstrating your good judgment. It's probably made the like signal to noise ratio extremely high, because these resumes look really impressive, but again, they don't say anything when you start reading them. And so I think AI has made where interviews are probably more paramount to hiring than they ever have been, because you're having to truly deep dive the person's experience and their stories to understand what they've done, because a lot of the resume stuff is starting to be written by AI, and again, it's lowering that barrier and that entry point of having these materials, but it is creating kind of that noise ratio of resumes are all starting to look really impressive, right? But when you get down into the meat of it, it's just not there. And so I think that's where people are going to have to influx their interviewing capability, because they're going to have to actually speak to their experience, because some people aren't going to be able to read the resumes that are coming out of some of these agents, and they're not going to really be able to understand like what you've done, and so they're going to only be able to get your judgment through those interviews. The second part of your question, what was that?
So that was about networking, and how important do you think that is in this whole sort of interviewing process? And I know you covered that a little bit earlier, but just to kind of dive a little bit deeper into it, is it really important? How important is it? And should people double down on networking and influencing?
Yeah, so I think networking is a double edged sword. I think you can network in really, really great ways, and then you can network in ways that it's just going to take you a lot of time and you're not going to see a lot of results. And so I would tell people again, the best way for you to express interest in a job is applying through the company's job page. The secondary best way is through networking, if you ask me. So, networking, though, I think it's something where you have to be so strategic about it that some people aren't putting that level of strategy into it, and so their networking is probably not producing the results that they want. Going and just networking, and I think this is something that happens to me quite a bit, with just a recruiter from Amazon, a recruiter from Microsoft, a recruiter from TikTok, a recruiter from Meta, doesn't mean you're networking with a recruiter that can help you, right? So just because I work at Amazon does not mean I could get you a job at Amazon in some other part of Amazon, or that I even understand that other part of Amazon, or what they look for, or how they gauge candidates, or anything. And so when you're going to network, you need to understand, am I finding the actual recruiter who's working on these roles, who's supporting this business? And then
How would
same
they
too.
know? How would they know
Okay.
the right recruiter? Like,
Yeah.
is it just on LinkedIn?
So I think it's hard, right? Because some companies don't say who the recruiters are, but it is. It's doing a lot of that due diligence on LinkedIn. Who's posting about the actual jobs that you're applying to? Most recruiters are assigned a business lane or a specific job family or a specific hiring manager, and that's what they work on. And a lot of times their knowledge doesn't necessarily cover all of the rest of the business because it's extremely niche, right? Or it's, very specific to what they do. And so if you can find out like on LinkedIn because they're posting about those roles or they're posting about those jobs, I think that's a great way. But a lot of times it's finding the people who are doing the actual work that you're looking to get into and then asking them, who's the recruiter that you worked with or how did you get into that space? You want to approach people who can actually help you, right? Who can actually offer you value. And so I think so many people sense, again, such a wide net when networking versus being very targeted in their approach. And that wide net probably isn't going to offer you the value of the work you're putting in. Where if you spend a little more time and you really honed in on who you should be networking with and who the right people are that are going to be able to move that needle with you for you, I think you'd see a better result. But there is no like prescriptive way to say, hey, go do this and you'll find those people, right? Like it's different everywhere. Everybody, some recruiters have never posted on LinkedIn. Some recruiters don't have a LinkedIn profile. Some hiring managers have never even seen LinkedIn. Some companies don't use LinkedIn for recruiting at all. And so I think, people need to take their situation and their context into mind when they're thinking about networking and say, okay, am I in this super niche skill set? If so, then like your best way of networking is staying in that super niche skill set and talking to those people in that area. If your, niche is way wide, then you might have a little bit better luck at casting that wide net. If you're in a really fungible role where, hey, a lot of the companies, this title does the same thing everywhere, you're going to have a little bit of an easier, search to find the people to network. But the only time I would say networking is going to maybe be a step above like applying or things like that is when you're being very targeted in that network and you're ensuring the people you're reaching out to are either in this role today or exactly in this space today, or same with recruiter, they're either recruiting for this space today or have recruited in this space, because outside of that, you're just kind of one of the millions of messages they're getting that are extremely generic and just not giving somebody something actionable they can actually help with.
Absolutely. I think what your message is spot on. And, I literally, I mean, people assume that networking is just like a sort of random event that just happened where you just happen to know these people, right? And,
Yeah.
I literally have a, separate calendar, like with a net, sort of a mesh of, okay, who do I know? When do I know this person? Why do I know this person? When is the next sort of recurring meeting I want to have this person? Um, all of those details. And like I feel like that is itself a full-time job,
Yeah.
which I think it deserves its own sort of episode. But just to condense that, like, people think that I know all these I know people just naturally, but it's not natural. It's literally like, as you said, like, it's strategy. It's being very strategic about, okay, I want to stay in contact with this person because I think this person just generally adds value. I get to learn
Mm-hmm.
a lot from this person, not with any assumption of, oh, or an intent of, I want to get something out of this person later on.
That
Right,
too.
there's no quick dopamine hit you're going to get from this. It's a long sort of
Mm-hmm.
process of friendship, which hopefully you're making for the sake of the friendship and for sake of learning. And then if it eventually leads to something, then it does. But really, networking, again, that's the wonderful part of networking, where you actually grow the kind of a support system. But also,
Yeah.
it's, if people are looking for that instant sort of, oh, what can I get from this, then I think networking is not for you, because you're not really going to get something like in that one conversation.
Exactly.
um, right, I mean, one
Yeah.
of my other friends was telling me the other day that she went to some networking event, in her city. And then she was like, oh, and then after that I never got um, any responses back. And then I asked, did you sort of try to reach out again and sort of try to just set up a cadence, but just to chat, not to
Yeah.
like immediately ask, because I don't think you can reach out to someone and then say, hey, get me a job,
Yeah.
right? To kind of build a relationship, right, over
Yeah.
time, that so that they trust you enough that they themselves feel like they want to help you. And I think that
Hmm.
comes with time, right? I think
Yeah.
that's the part most people miss, is the they do the networking bit where they reach out to someone and then they're like, okay, I didn't get anything from it. But
Yeah.
the middle part is the big chunk of effort, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to look at it all as like an investment, right? Like anytime you're networking, if you're wanting to seek something from that relationship, you're going to have to invest into it. And so, I think, obviously hiring, recruiting, candidates have gotten very used to just ask instead of like, how could I also benefit this relationship? And specifically from a networking perspective, right? Like, if you're working with a recruiter, you don't need to benefit them other than getting hired. That's their goal. But if you're networking with a recruiter or you're networking with somebody who does hiring, if all you do is come with an ask, that's probably not going to give them a lot of like, oh, this is a true connection for me, or oh, this is truly networking. We get hundreds of asks all the time for, can I get a referral to this job or a referral to that job? But if I think when people reach out to build that relationship, or when they reach out to say, like, hey, I know you don't have maybe something for me today, but would love to just connect with you and learn more about what you do, or where Leo is headed, or what is going on there. Those, when you can also bring something, is, I think, gives you that kind of competitive advantage of, I've made a friend almost, right? Like I've made a true connection point here versus just somebody who I'm kind of sending my resume to, and I'm kind of hoping for the best. True networking, I think, is when it's like that give and take, and you're not just upfront asking, even though that's what you need, right? Like, and when you need a job, I think it makes sense. Like, go and ask people and ask for those introductions. But where you can, if you're truly trying to network and this isn't like an instant gratification, I need a job today, what can you do? How can you add value to this relationship? How can you make this a mutually beneficial networking connection, versus just what I can do for you? And so I think when candidates approach networking from that perspective, it gives them a lot better result, because they're not saying, hey, I reached out to 500 recruiters today and I got 5 jobs. They're saying, hey, I've been networking with 10 recruiters for a year and now I'm finally getting some jobs, right? Like, that's probably more realistic. Granted, can you reach out and get a job, and are there things that move super fast? Absolutely. But I just don't know that networking is its most effective from a recruiting perspective, unless you're, again, trying to kind of invest in that relationship and truly, take it past just the ask.
Absolutely. And I think the networking relationship, if nothing happens, nothing comes out of it, at least you'd have made a friend.
Hmm.
And I think that's how I like to look at it, is, oh wow, now I have all these friends, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's very important to have friends who are in from your career space, from that community, who are not part of your like family or like your personal life, right?
Yeah.
Because you get to have all these sort of a variety of different conversations, career growth conversations. I mean, I've had so much um I, I mean, I've learned so much just from talking to people, and making friends in the career world, right?
Yeah.
And I just view it as, okay, we're we're becoming friends. And um, i- and also I think sometimes, for example, things like during layoffs or other life
Hmm.
crisis moments, right? These are the people you can also count on.
Yeah.
And I've counted on them, like during my layoff last year. I was like, oh, this is hard for me. And I would chat with people and they would give me a lot of support. And in fact, they would actually tell me that they would see things in me that I couldn't see in myself,
Yeah.
to the point that you had before, right? You mentioned before, which is they can people other people might be able to see things that you can't see in yourself, and sometimes these are those people who can see that and keep you afloat,
Yeah.
and from sinking, right?
Well, and you need people who can pour into you too, right? Like the job search is incredibly lonely. Looking for a job and not, and especially if you don't have one, is probably one of the scariest, hardest emotional searches or things you can probably be in because your livelihood depends on it, right? Like you have to eat. People need money. People need a job. People need health care. And so I feel like it can be an incredibly lonely place. And it can, again, do marketing is out there, especially when it comes to this. Like, that's where they get you, right? Like, they want you to go pay for their service to get you a job overnight. They want you to, I don't know, whatever, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
so many things that they're pitching and they're selling. And it's like, when you have a network or when you have people in your corner or your community who can say like, hey, no, like you are worthy, look at all these things you've done and look at all these things you've accomplished, or hey, let me introduce you to so and so, it can just make you feel not alone. And I think that's incredibly powerful because when we know that we're not alone in a fight and like there's people out there putting your name in these rooms, there's people out there sharing your resume, it feels like it's a group effort. It feels like, hey, like even if I have a really bad day today, there are other people out there helping me accomplish my goal. And you only get that by truly building relationships with those that you work with, right? Having that networking, having that investment up front. And then when you come with the ask, it's like, well, there's already this
Rapport.
want for me to help
Yeah.
you, right? Like I know you, I've encountered you a few times. We've had happy conversations. You've helped me when I was sad, or I've helped you, and then it's like that want, right? Like I want to help you find something. I want to be a part of
It's natural.
your
Yeah, it
journey.
comes natural.
Yeah, and so I think truly building authentic networking relationships is where you will see so much of that support and those people again. If you have someone who's willing to say your name in a room you're not in, that is incredible. But you don't get that off a cold message on LinkedIn. Right? Like
Oh, ooh.
that
Yeah.
that doesn't come from you saying, hey, can you look at my resume and tell me what jobs I'd be good for. That comes from, hey, we've connected, we've shared humanity together, right? Like we've shared our humanness, and now I am a battler in your field, right? Like now I'm going to go to bat for you too. Um, but that is where networking, I think, makes that difference. But so many people approach networking as just like cold LinkedIn messages or cold introductions or whatever, and that's not truly networking, right? Like to truly network, you have to be willing to give as much as you're going to receive. And when we start networking from a place where you're just asking, it's not going to feel as genuine and you're not going to get the support that you would get if it was more of that mutual.
Couldn't agree more, Tori. So, with that, before we reach or before we do the last part of our podcast um,
Yeah.
episode, which is the rapid fire, um, I would like to ask you if you had any sort of um, any trends that you've generally observed in recruiting, or just any advice from what you've seen. What if there's one thing you wish you shared with job seekers right now, what would that be?
Go back to yourself, right? You are the only person who knows what you've done. You're the only person who's had your experience. You're the only person who knows kind of your thought process. And if you truly take the time to understand like what you need in a role, where you are successful, what breeds the best in you, I feel like then it's a lot easier to back into the right position. And it's a lot easier for you to um, sell is not the right word. I kind of hate that word, but it's easier for you to show someone how you can do that job or be in that job or be successful in that job and have confidence in your interviewing when you truly know what you need, who you are, and kind of where you're going. And authentic authentically, because if you are trying to just find any job, if you are just trying to do anything, you aren't going to approach it in that kind of systematic way. You're not going to approach it with your full self. You are going to just be trying to kind of fit where it fits instead of like the right fit. And so I think when people really dig deep into themselves, they ask themselves those hard questions, they really get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's when kind of that magic happens, right? Like that's when you start having these genuine conversations and truly exploring what's possible. And then you'll feel it, right? Like you'll know when it's the right role, you'll know when it's the right fit, you'll know when you're on the right path. And I think that matters more than a lot of people think. I think a lot of people in their mind it's like, hey, if I get this job it solves all my problems, and it's like the final solution. And in reality I think if we made sure that what we were doing, what we were going after, and where we were trying to place ourselves, if we made sure that was true to who we were and what we really needed, I think that would make the doors open a lot easier. But I feel like that's a really hard thing to explain or kind of walk through. But um, you have to be who you are and you have to know who you are and know your strengths and know where you have areas of opportunity, and then kind of approach it from that lens so that way you find the best environment for you, and so that way you don't end up in this situation 6 months from now. And so you do start building those genuine connections, because uh, careers aren't something that you just like happily fall into over and over and over again. Like they typically need to be something that we put a lot of thought and energy and effort into, and not something we should just leave up to chance, right? It's not just, hey, I applied to 100 roles and I happened to get this job and that's where I'm going. Um, Having that kind of strategy and that plan and that path, I think make the journey a lot easier, and open a lot more doors authentic why can't I speak authentically for you, right? Like it's an easy entrance. It's you're not fighting against the flow, right? Like it's there's no friction. You kind of make it work for you versus you working for it.
Well said, Tori. And I think I would just also like to add another extra point is that uh, I think people should be constantly networking, constantly
Mm-hmm.
building that community so that when they need it, they have it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's not something that can be done overnight, right? And when you need a job is not the time to start these activities, right? And that's what I tell people too with their resume. Your resume is a constant work of effort. It should never be done. It should never be finished. There should never be a final draft, right? Like you should be reiterating and adding to, and even if you're not looking, right? I go back and I update my resume twice a year with all my new accomplishments, because when you get 4 years, 5 years, 6 years in at a company, and then it's like, oh my goodness, I was laid off, or oh my goodness, something terrible happened. To go back and then start trying to write your resume is incredibly hard. Like,
yeah,
what did I do? Where have I been? Who am I? Like, I don't even know.
yeah,
But if you're constantly like reiterating, adding to, building that document, you make it kind of like your portfolio of your career. you're not starting from scratch. And same with networking, right? Like if you hold yourself up throughout your whole career and you only do your job and you don't kind of expand that network and you don't start doing some of that proactive networking, again, when something bad happens, you get a layoff, your role is eliminated, something like that, you're starting from scratch. And you're also doing it from a I need perspective versus like let me also contribute to you. And if you can keep those more naturally happening throughout your career, right, creating those connections, keeping those connections strong, adding to your resume, when those things happen, you're already prepared, right? Like you've got your network of 20, 30 people that you've been working with and you've mentored or you've come in contact to, that you can easily say, hey, I got laid off today. Here's my resume. Can you review it for me? Can you introduce me to somebody? And you're not starting from scratch.
Absolutely. Well, that was amazing, Tori. And with that, are you ready for our final segment, the rapid fire round?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start. You can answer in one word or one sentence, all right?
Okay. All right,
Okay.
I'll try.
Okay. Um, one page resume or 2 pages?
2 pages.
LinkedIn profile or resume? Which tells you more about a candidate?
Resume.
Degree or experience?
Experience.
Would you hire someone who's technically brilliant but difficult to work with?
Ooh. Can I say depends?
No.
Ugh.
Pick one. Go ahead. Pick one.
No.
I I I thought so. I thought you'd arrive at that answer. Yeah.
It's a hard
Uh,
one. It really is. Because sometimes we really need some specific technical skills, but it's not worth risking a team or an environment or overall goal of a project for someone who might disrupt that.
Absolutely. Okay. Should candidates use AI to write their resumes?
I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to put a caveat in there too. And I know you said just
Okay.
one word or one sentence, but I'm going to say yes because I think it has leveled the playing field a little bit. And why I say that is so many people don't have access. So many people don't have knowledge. So many people haven't been given the formula, right, of writing a perfect resume. Some people don't have a way with words. Some people like, right, there's so many things. And AI has kind of, again, they've lowered that barrier of entrance into the right materials for this job. But where I would say no is it's not plug and play. It's not, here's my experience, write me a resume, and then you submit that resume, right? Like you have to be almost as smart as the tool you're using and make sure that what it's actually producing for you is something usable. Because if you just use a really bad prompt and it produces a really terrible resume, that has not benefited you at all. But I think AI, again, it's lowered that barrier, and access to me and ability to do something matters more than maybe the perfect execution of doing it. Because again, we have people around the world who have just never had access to this education, who've never had access to asking a resume writer these questions, and that shouldn't stop people from writing great resumes or being successful in the application process.
I love that answer. Actually, I've never heard this one before, where we're also talking about sort of underprivileged, underserved communities
Mm-hmm.
that may have never had access to this, and for them, this is the first time
Life
they get
changing.
to do that, right? Um,
Yeah.
as opposed to us living in sort of like a first world, highly
Yeah.
privileged environment where we have everything. And no, that's
Exactly.
interesting. Yeah, good
Yeah,
answer. Thank
yeah,
you.
I think it's incredible. We just need to get the tools on how to use it the right way into their hands, right? Which is, I think, the current kind of thing that we're struggling with is the inaccurate use of AI more than it is the use of AI, right? I think we've and environmentally it's a whole different question, and we're not gonna we're not gonna approach that. But if we're
Yeah.
using AI in the right way, if we have the right prompts, if we are given the tools to use it well, it is incredible. And I think that's the piece that hiring has been missing for so long, right? It has been this kind of gate heavy thing. Like there has been a gate of entry. And if you don't have a good resume, if you don't have access to a resume writer, if you don't have access to a recruiter who can help put you in front of the right people, there has been that gate. And AI can eliminate that. We just need to make sure that the people who have access to it also know how to use it, right? And so that way it's actually a tool for them versus like a hindrance. But I do, yeah, I think AI is going to provide access and ability to those who have not been given it before.
Amazing. I love it. Okay, is networking an unfair advantage or just smart career strategy?
Smart career strategy. I don't think I've ever seen it give someone an unfair advantage.
Unless it's for the people who can't um, do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if you can't do it, it definitely can hinder you, but no one is getting a job because of their network, right? Like
Absolutely.
that network may open the door, but they're still getting the job themselves. And so that would be kind of my thought process there is it's a benefit for sure.
Yeah, it's a way for putting you on the top, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, if you could eliminate one hiring practice forever, what would that be?
Um, and I feel like now it's changing a little bit, but like those automated interviewers, AI
Mm.
interviewers, or like computer interviews, I've actually been asked to do a few of them in my career, and like my immediate answer is no. I don't believe recruiting needs to become transactional. I don't believe it needs to be just a paper organization or just a process. Like I think recruiting takes a human element, and so um, I would remove any sort of like automated interviewing
Mm.
piece that keeps candidates from an actual recruiter conversation.
Mm. I love that. Yeah. I think a lot of us would want to hear that. So.
Yeah, I don't want to use them, so trust me, I'm right there with you.
Right. Okay, what's one hard truth every job seeker needs to hear but doesn't want to?
You're probably not the most qualified candidate who applied.
Right. Amazing. I love it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I mean, I guess I would also caveat that too, right? You could be, but we're in a time where there's incredibly talented people every single day applying to jobs, and just because you're incredibly qualified doesn't mean you were the most qualified. Um, and so if you get rejected, you kind of have to understand that, right? Like it wasn't necessarily um, about you, right? Like there could have just been another really amazing candidate.
Absolutely. So this next question is about ATS. And so is ATS really rejecting resumes in an automated way as a gatekeeping mechanism, or is it just a myth?
So, an ATS system is a fancy filing box. An ATS system has no brain, it has no processing decision capability. An ATS system can only action based off of what the owner has put in. So there is no ATS system that automatically rejects you based on its decision. There are ATS systems that reject you based off of a number of things that a recruiter can format in that system or a hiring manager can format. So when you think about automated rejections from an ATS system, they're typically coming from a couple of things. One, you've already interviewed for that company, that job role, that job family, and you weren't inclined. ATS systems are smart. They're going to go back, they're going to see through that log. And if it's within the time period that that company doesn't re interview candidates, they'll auto dispo you. They also work off of questions. So a lot of candidate or a lot of companies will put, I would say like somewhere between like 3 and maybe like 7 to 10 questions with your application. These will be things like, do you have experience with marketing? Do you require sponsorship? Do you have a bachelor's degree? Have you worked in a global role? Have you been in recruiting, right? They're going to be those kind of basic qualification questions. These are typically knockout questions. For those, some questions will be required and some questions will be preferred. Required questions that you answer with either a no and it's supposed to be a yes, or a yes and it's supposed to be a no, will auto reject you. So if that role requires a bachelor's degree and you put no, I don't have a bachelor's degree, that system is going to reject you because you don't meet the basic qualifications for the position. So those are really the only, I would say, like mechanisms put in place that auto reject you, but it's all based on input that the recruiter has decided, or a question or something that they have decided to put in there and they have formatted the rejection. So it is never the system saying, oh, this is the job, this is what I think you should have, you don't have that, you're rejected. It never works like that. The system is owned, operated, managed by the recruiter or the hiring manager, and all of the decisions it makes are based off of the input that that recruiter or that hiring manager put in for that specific role.
Understood. So the system is not really working against anyone.
No, and I've seen a lot of talk about the AI assessments and like the AI like crawling your resume and giving you kind of match scores. AI tools do have this capability, right? Like they're able to read the job description, read your resume, and say, okay, they have this tool, they have this tool, they have this tool. But they're not rejecting you based off of that information. It may rank where the recruiter sees your resume in comparison to the other people that applied. But it's not going to reject you off of that information. Now, online assessments, they have AI doing some of that in some other companies. I'm not a part of it, and so I don't have firsthand information. But from my understanding, some of these assessments do have where AI essentially grades your responses and then can reject you off of that. I can't speak to it because I haven't used it. We don't use it here. But again, it wouldn't be off your resume. It would be off of your performance through an online assessment. And so, I think it kind of, it goes both ways depending on like the company that you're looking at. But an ATS system itself is never auto rejecting you based on its own wills or wants, or that doesn't exist. It's
Yeah.
only actions a recruiter has programmed it to
Okay.
respond to.
Interesting. I didn't know that either, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Are cover letters still alive?
No.
Thought so. Yeah, I remember writing cover letters back in the day, but I don't see them anymore too. Yeah.
The only time I will say a cover letter can be helpful is with a large transition. If you're moving from like one area to another, or you're wanting to bridge a gap, like if you were moving in from like sales to program management or something like that, you could definitely use a cover letter to try and kind of circumvent some of the
Yeah.
questions you may get. But no, I very, very, very rarely see cover letters come through. In most cases, the hiring team have no interest in reviewing them.
Gotcha. If you had to choose one, confidence or competence?
Competence, probably. I think confidence is sometimes what can cause some interviewers to be more excited about a candidate, right? Confidence can definitely give people the impression that you can do things that you maybe can't. But I think that is overcome with competence, right? Like if you actually have the capability, is far better than just being confident, because some people are confidently wrong, and that's not a skill that
Yeah.
necessarily is needed. And so
Yeah.
I think confidence is
Interestingly,
almost like a false positive a lot of times. Like some people will read that as competence, and it's not. And so I've actually pushed back on people, and it's almost like confirmation bias too from interviewers. Like, are you actually seeking to confirm what you already thought, like because you liked them or you viewed their confidence as something positive, or are you just kind of going with it because the way that they approach the question, right? And so I feel like I didn't even say that very well, but
No, you did.
confidence is, it just shows you're good at interviewing, right? It doesn't show you can actually come in and do the job. And again, it's almost like that false positive. And like if you're measuring for confidence, you're not measuring for ability. And I think interviewers who are good at interviewing can really separate those two. You're not trying to reward the loudest person, you're trying to uncover the strongest evidence.
Absolutely. I think you said it really well. So, okay, should companies always tell candidates why they were rejected?
In a perfect world, yes. In a world where candidates could actually get actionable feedback, I think that is absolutely something we should do. However, is it possible? No. I'll be really
Yeah,
transparent. We have never found an actually scalable way to provide actionable feedback to candidates, and that's the issue, right? If there was an equitable, consistent way to scalably provide all candidates with actionable feedback, I think that is what we would do. But because we haven't, and it very transparently opens up companies to a lot of risk and a lot of legality concerns, I think that's why we don't, right? But I do think when you are able to network and kind of have those uh, more passive relationships with recruiters, that is where you can get some of that feedback,
yeah,
or with some of those interviewers too, which is probably the only place you're actually able to get that feedback. And I think that's an issue in recruiting, and I think it's still something that we need to work through. And maybe with AI, like that is something where we'll be able to come up with some scalable solutions. But yeah, I think this is probably the one interesting area, or like kind of on that fence of like, how do we fix it? Like it obviously needs to be fixed, but then there's like legality and risk issues. But when you look at it from a candidate experience perspective, feedback's the only way for them to get better, right? Feedback is the only chance that they have to improve on it. And so I encourage hiring managers to give feedback when they can on interviews, especially if that candidate has subsequent interviews afterwards. But am I going to, tell candidates like, oh, you're going to start getting feedback? No. I
yeah,
wish you
yeah,
could. I wish we could find a way to make it happen, but unfortunately, I think that's an area where we just don't have the right answer. There's just
yeah.
not.
And I think it's, as to your point, it's harder to do it at scale formally, but people can get feedback, sort of informally. And I've had that experience too, where I've reached out and asked, and they would be like, "Hey, Loki, here's things that you can work on," and
Yeah.
so- and again, this goes back to your point of building a network, building a relationship with someone, and how those things can become so important in even in these stages, right? Okay, so on to the last segment of our questions, which are more sort of society changing, thinking about how do we sort of redefine things, right?
Yeah.
So, do you think the biggest career advantage is today is skill, privilege, or proximity to the opportunity?
I would say a mix of proximity and privilege, if I was being really honest. I think proximity is probably the top, right? The closer you are to the role, the easier it is to get that open door. Again, the quicker you are to the application pool, the more likely you are to move through the process. And so, yeah, I would say proximity, but to acknowledge too, like privilege has existed, and we are in such a net negative with privilege that that will always almost be kind of the top thing there, because it has been so long, right? Like you are never going to be able to go back and change the fact that, some people's parents were doctors and lawyers for like, right, like their grandpa was this, their grandpa's dad, their mom's mom, and so they've, by way of that, kind of naturally been in these circles their entire life. They have a natural network. They went to prestigious colleges, or they have a really great pedigree. You can't counteract those things, right? They just exist. But I do think we are finally in a time of humanity where the population is so mass and skills are so varied and innovation is so centered on there being all types of people at the table, that proximity is starting to have a little bit, right, a little bit of that
Yeah.
space in there too, because again, right, you apply first, you know the recruiter, whatever, right, you're close to that type of position. And pedigree, I think, is kind of falling to that wayside, because we've also gotten the data that pedigrees don't necessarily mean great employees,
Mm.
right? I think they said people who graduate from like the top universities, I think it was only like 25% of them end up actually being top performers comparatively to those who don't. And most of the time you end up having to pay them 35% more higher than you would someone without the pedigree education that you're looking for. And so when you start like thinking about that stuff, it starts to tell you like, okay, proximity is starting to matter, but privilege will always be there. And having access to early networks, having, being included in conversations early, having access to a parent who did this or lived in this life, even getting you into, right, a college that was their alma mater, like those are all things that will open doors, that proximity doesn't always open for you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
always acknowledging privilege is something we're all
Yeah.
encountering, and definitely can add a level of complexity to the job search if you don't have that in your back pocket.
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is so that we kind of, because one of the things with privilege is the access to information and circles and networks that other people maybe get access to later on in life,
Mm-hmm.
much later in life, or never, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully through this podcast, this platform really is to like bring people like yourself into this space
Yeah.
and give access to this information that we have, that you have, to everybody. So now it
Yeah.
becomes accessible to all, and at least we don't have to gatekeep information, right? Valuable
Mm-hmm.
information.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
so
think
yeah.
that's what's kind of, made me passionate and empathetic about this space is, my parents were first generation American born. My grandparents came from Finland. Neither of my parents have ever written a resume, right? Neither of them ever had corporate jobs. My mom was a bartender and alligator wrestler. So, like,
Oh wow, interesting.
I don't come from, a
Wow.
pedigree or a
We should have
privileged
started.
background.
Yeah, we should have started with that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah.
And so, when I got into the job market and when I started kind of trying to understand my career, I didn't have that to fall back on. I couldn't ask my parents, well, hey, can you introduce me to somebody? Or hey, can you help me write my resume? Or hey, can you help me be prepared for interviewing? And I think even like today, right? Like when I encounter people, I'm never coming from that place of privilege because I didn't have it. But I am coming from that place of empathy of like, how can we make this better? Because I know what I went through to get here. And like, we don't need that, right? We don't need a gate path. We don't need blockers. We need people who are making it more approachable, more easy, more accessible. And I think the fact that, I kind of had to come up through it that way really kind of enlightened me, right? Like, it made me understand not everybody has access to a resume writer. It made me understand not everybody's parents can connect them to their first internship, things like that. And you don't realize how much that is happening always until you're kind of on the other side of it. And it's like, oh man, like all of my friends, their parents got them internships somewhere, and I didn't have that, capability or that possibility. And so I think it's made me approach this space from that perspective, and probably made me a little more open to AI and some of these tools that candidates are using, because I see it from a removing barrier, right? Like that was
Yeah.
a barrier I had to overcome, and if that's not a barrier someone else has to figure out, I think that's great, right? Like um we don't need people who can't afford resumes paying $600 for a resume. Like you need to pay for your groceries, you need your lights, you need your health care. And if that is doable because you can log into an LLM or a chatbot and have it write you a resume, then I think like we're finally doing the right things in the world, right? Like that's the point. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that you're approaching it from a place of empathy. So, on behalf of everybody that you've helped or that you're going to, thank you so much, Tori, for
Yeah,
I really
of
appreciate
course.
that. Yeah. Okay, we're down to the final last couple of questions. Um, do you think that there's still a familiarity bias uh, that because of which most people get hired depending on who they look like that companies have already hired? It can be gender, it can be minorities, all those things.
Yeah, so I think it definitely happens, right? Like it's bias. We are always again kind of looking for that confirmation bias of like confirming our already beliefs, and similarity. Are you liking this person because it's familiar to you or similar to you? I think those definitely happen, but I think that's where recruiters and HR managers and hiring managers have that due diligence of coaching their interviewers, and truly creating a barrier to becoming an interviewer by saying like, hey, are you actually evaluating skill set, or are you evaluating likeness, right? Are you looking to confirm your already made opinion, or are you looking for things that would change your mind? And that is something where companies have the onus, right? Hiring managers have the onus, HR managers have the onus, I have the onus. If I and it's happened, I'll, like I've
Yeah,
called
of course.
hiring managers out, I've called interviewers out, like, hey, you went into that extremely biased, and then all of the evidence that you sought to understand was just to confirm your belief, like what you already went in assuming. And so, our job as recruiters, and our job as people who own the hiring process, is to ensure that that's not creeping into the process, and to ensure that our interviewers are calibrated and trained to, again, look for evidence, seek evidence, not seek familiarity, or, kind of trap themselves into confusing familiarity for capability. I
Hmm.
think it's natural for people to kind of gravitate to people who look like us, communicate like us, have a similar career path, but none of those are going to say you can successfully do this job. And so I think we have to be really careful and make sure that we implement things into the process to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I think something that is something Amazon's done really well with, in
Yeah.
making the feedback required, right? Like you're not able to just make a decision and not support it with evidence. And so I think that that's, a piece of it, but also too, questioning, right? Those interviewers, if they say something like they reminded me of myself, or they came from my previous company, or I liked them, they're someone I'd have a beer with, things like that. Like those aren't hiring metrics. Those aren't things that are going to predict success in the role. And so pushing back and making sure that you're asking, like, what was the evidence that they can actually solve the problem that this role requires? Or, asking yourself, like, what would change my mind if I'm entering that interview from a negative perspective? I think those are going to be, important to making sure that those biases aren't happening. Um, but yeah, I think that's,
Interesting.
it's
Yeah,
it's kind of a training and a coaching, and kind of the onus is on the company of making sure that these things aren't happening and that their interviewers aren't exhibiting these traits.
absolutely. And so follow up to that question is then should companies, in order to make sure that um, that there's diversity in the workplace, should companies then have sort of some sort of a quota or a reservation for a certain amount of hiring that needs to happen with a set percentage of addressing certain minority groups okay, and we can take an example of just women. That's the most common
Hmm.
one out there, right? So should that be prioritized as a percentage or a target within a company?
I don't know. I'm going to be honest and say I don't know, because I don't know what the perfect answer is here. Because I think it's incredibly nuanced, right? Like in some positions, that's absolutely doable, and you can track it to that metric, and you can push for those certain things. Again, I would take it back to like SDE or software development engineers. Um, you probably can have a team of truly diverse people in that area in equity perspectives, right? You could have equal amounts of it. But then if you come into a role like, I don't know, like an aerospace engineer with, specific IFC, IFE, you may have certain markers of diversity that you can hit. Maybe it's gender, maybe it's ethnicity, things like that. But then there will be some that you can't, right? Because that market doesn't exist, because that talent pool doesn't exist. And so I think to say putting a percentage is like the thing is probably the wrong answer, because it's not completely applicable across all things, but you have to evaluate and understand the market and the talent availability, and then make sure that you're being equitable in how you build the team out to represent that, right? Or represent the community that it sits in, or something like that. And so I think that's more paramount to than saying like, oh, across the board, we want to input these numbers or have meet this percentage, or do that, right? Because that's not attainable in every space. But taking every space, understanding the community that it serves, the things that it does, understanding what the talent market availability is, and ensuring that we are doing our best to make sure that there is that diverse representation, especially for the community that this thing is helping, or would be involved in. I think that is doable, right? We can reach that, or make that achievable. And so that would probably be my advice is, every role should have an understanding of what's possible, who's possible, and then trying to make the right, um, I guess, right, like grouping of those people. But no, I wouldn't say like, oh, in every role we want to have 50% gender split, because that's probably not
Yeah,
likely.
it's not possible. Yeah, agreed,
Yeah.
agreed. And I think generally we've come very far along in terms of um, having more women in the workforce and having
Hmm.
other ethnicities and things like that. I mean, of course, we have a long way to go, but I think we've also come very far from where the world was, what, like even 20,
Absolutely.
30 years back, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think it's too, like, if we change the conversation of saying like companies, you have to have this or that in seat, but companies, you need to be enabling this community to come into this seat, or helping this underserved or underprivileged area gain access to these skills. I think that's more important
Mhm.
than dictating like what actually gets hired, right? Because I think a lot of the time the problem is access. It's not lack of, or like lack of people. It's the people having access to gain those skills, to get into those spaces. And if companies put their focus there on making this accessible, on going to either this diverse population and enabling them to gain these skills or whatever, would actually increase the diversity amongst the teams, right? I think it's more about the barriers of entry, than it is to keeping companies saying like 35% need to be women or whatever. I think if we leveled the entry playing field, the rest would naturally
Mm,
follow. And so I hope that is where some of our focus is going into, um, that privilege, right? Like making sure privilege isn't the only thing that can gain that skill, making
yeah,
sure that that is,
yeah.
you know,
Level the playing field again. Yeah.
yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I promise my last question. This
Okay.
is my last question. So, most of most of the people in their early career are always hesitant to say, I don't know, when they're
Mhm.
asked a question in an interview or in a meeting, even after they join, or maybe just even in school. So, I'm sure they would want to hear from you more than they would want to hear from me on this. And so the question is it okay to say, I don't know, as the answer
Yes.
to a question?
Yes, yes, yes. It is better to say I don't know than it is to be confidently wrong. I cannot tell you how many candidates I have had where the technical interviewer has seen really good results, but they asked them a question that the interviewer or the candidate didn't know, and the candidate made up an answer or like told them something completely wrong versus just saying, I don't know. And that is a bigger red flag than the I don't know. So, if you don't know, if you don't know that networking protocol or that routing protocol or whatever, if you haven't gone through MPLS or something, it is better to be like, oh, I don't know, it's been a while since I worked on that, than to confidently say the wrong thing. Because if you go and confidently say the wrong thing to our customer, you can't take that back. But if you
Yeah,
go to our customer and you say, oh, I'm not really sure. Let me go talk with some experts back at Amazon or wherever, and let me get back to you. That is going to breed that like trust in that
yeah.
relationship a lot better than confidently saying the wrong thing.
I think this was the perfect conclusion to our episode,
Yay.
Tori. This was amazing. I mean, this was better than I even expected. So thank you
Love
so
it.
much for your time. And I know it's a Friday evening, so hopefully after this you get a chance to rest and relax. But thank you for doing this for
Yeah.
me and for
Thanks
all
for
of
having me.
us watching. I'm sure it was meaningful, and I'm sure it's healing for a lot of people to hear from you about a lot of these topics that people may not know about, or just may not have first-hand information about, and maybe making a lot of assumptions. So thank you for being here, Tori. Any final words you want to share before we conclude?
I think the only thing I would add, is recruiters are a resource. Recruiters aren't a blocker. And the more you get comfortable working with a recruiter, talking to a recruiter, interacting with a recruiter, trusting a recruiter, I think the better experience or outcome you will have. And yes, there are bad recruiters. Yes, there are recruiters who ghost candidates, and there are all those negative things out there. But if when you enter the process, if you give that recruiter the benefit of the doubt, or you at least seek to not just confirm your negative opinion, I think most people will see a much more positive experience and understand recruiters are trying to work with you, right? Their best outcome is if you get a job. So asking them questions, taking their advice, truly connecting with them, and kind of being in that vulnerable space, and sharing what you are looking for and what you're not looking for, those are only going to help you. And I know it's scary. And I know, again, the information out there is really negative towards recruiters. But the people who ignore that and they lean in and they give the recruiter the opportunity to show them one way or another, I think they come away with such a better experience, and they typically will find those recruiters, right, who are going to go the extra mile, who will help them. um, and I think, that's what I would leave people with. Most recruiters got into recruiting to change people's lives. They did it because they wanted to give people job offers, because they wanted to, help people find their career. um, I don't know any recruiter who got into recruiting to reject resumes.
Thank you. That I feel like you healed me a little bit as well. The child in me that always wanted to hear this from someone in recruiting. So thank you so much, Tori. Very well said, very well spoken. Um, Hopefully, everyone watching this really enjoyed this episode. And with that, take care, everyone. And Tori, hopefully, we'll see you again at some other point with if the audience has a request for another episode. But with that, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. It was great. Have a good one. Bye.